Please welcome Catlin Roper, Executive Editorial Director of Books, Film, TV, and Events at the New York Times, and Orna Guralnik, Clinical Psychologist and Psychoanalyst.
And this is Nico. For anyone who watches couples therapy, you're familiar with Nico. Hi, everyone. Dr. Orna Guralnik is a clinical psychologist, psychoanalyst, and a writer. She's on the faculty of NYU postdoc program in psychoanalysis. She's also the therapist, psychoanalyst, and consulting producer of the documentary series Couples Therapy on Showtime and Paramount Plus. A new season is coming. It airs on May 22nd. It's amazing. On the show, for the few of you who haven't watched, Orna provides therapy to real couples in real need. Each episode weaves together sessions with 5 couples, and over the arc of the season, we get to know them all and see Orna calm, listening intently, and helping them. Orna, it's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and hello.
Back in 2019, when I watched the first episode of Couples Therapy, within the first few minutes, I was overwhelmed with dislike for one half of the first couple that we meet. His narcissism felt poisonous, but somehow over the season, as you sat there calmly, zen, magical patience, I was able to access empathy, listen to them, and empathy really for them both. How do you do that?
In a way, it's a question asking, what does it mean to be a psychoanalyst? Part of what we do as psychoanalysts, we have like a very long training that, in a way, it trains us to create a kind of, what Keats called negative capability, right? That way that we quiet ourselves inside so that we can make room to actually try to get to know who's in front of us and what's going on there. And which is really what empathy is about. I mean, you quiet yourself and you make room for someone else and you use your own emotional system to connect with them. And I think the idea is really to quiet things down, tune in, try to really get to know who's in front of you, and let their unconscious emerge. You kind of create space and you kind of invite things that they weren't necessarily aware of to come into the space. And when that happens, you get to really know them and you get to care for them, like Mao.
Yeah, I think you talk about how people who are close and decide to marry are deeply, incredibly different, and that it's hard accepting that difference. What do you mean? Because you could definitely see that with that couple, Oh,
you can see that with all couples.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the challenges of being in a close relationship, especially in a romantic one, but in all relationships, is that another person presents you with their difference. And we're all different. We can be profoundly different, like come from different backgrounds and different genders and have different beliefs and different hormonal systems, but we're also different in the smallest ways, in like the way we load the dishwasher and how we want to spend our money and whether we think our kids should go to public school. So being close to another person presents you immediately with this question of difference. And the compromised human beings that we are, we respond to difference, first of all, with alarm and with some question of who's right, who's wrong, who's better, who's worse. We don't just take difference lightly. It immediately becomes kind of a question to ourselves. And Laurent Berlant, who's an amazing theorist, she talks about the everyday inconvenience of other people. They trip on your space and they cause you to have to think about what you're doing. So, and then there's the bigger questions of like, what if you really want to do different things? If you have real different beliefs, if you have different values, if you vote for different parties, you got to negotiate that.
Yeah, that makes me want to ask you about, from your perspective, do you find yourself worrying about the future possibility of a couple? You know, like, are there specific things that make you worry and think that they can't come back together, can't cross that difference?
Yeah, people ask me that quite a lot. Generally, like, first of all, as a couples therapist, my general orientation, just because I'm in the role of the couples therapist, my general orientation is I'm pro the relationship. So I'm an optimist and I'm romantic, and so I have in general like this idea that let's try to make this work. That's my orientation. And I think for many people that's true. They can make it work. It might involve a lot of soul searching and kind of digging into like resources inside, but I think people can make it work. And there are situations, to your question, where I'm like, I don't know. I mean, after I work with people for a while, where I feel like there might be some real resistance to change or real resistance to self-reflection. And then there are certain situations where I feel like definitely not. And that's when, I mean, that's a very small percent of the people I ever see, but when people get kind of addicted to a certain kind of sadism or brutality, or, you know, there's a certain thrill in conflict, and people can get like very attached to that, either because of their own histories or for whatever reason. And sometimes I can't find in them any wish to get out of that. And they just use the relationship to wage war. And I'm not into that.
Yeah, it makes me think about the anger that you see on the show in couples who've been together for a long time, who are holding clearly a story that we can see as the audience resolutely, you know, and it's like, will they ever come off that story? Is it adaptable at all, you know? Like, how do you, when you know, it's different than the question of, you know, should they be together?
Right.
But when you see these stories that people are holding on to with rage, like, and they can't hear each other, what can you do then?
Well, in a way, that is my job. I mean, the way you framed it. Like, what's my entry point to help people kind of let go of their stories, and in a way sort of similar to what you were asking me earlier on, like, find a way to listen to something else that could emerge within them and between them. Like that's like the big part of my job, which is like how to disembed people from their stories. And there are many ways to do that, but that's... So am I answering your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just, you know, I think there's an experience, certainly observing on the show, where you sort of think to yourself, oh no, like the two stories don't really align.
Right.
This happens in the new season as well. Like, you know, one person believes one story about what's happening, another believes another, you know? And I guess it sort of feels miraculous to watch it.
Yeah.
You know? Watch them be able to hear each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Just the story.
What's interesting about couples, really long-term couples, is that their stories misalign on the face of it. But when you work with people long enough and you listen carefully to what's going on there, their stories are actually usually quite complementary or aligned, in the sense that people often, like, one story kind of sits on the trauma of the other person, and the other person sits on the trauma of the original one, and their stories actually have this kind of there's a certain kind of narrative beauty to their not, that when they understand about each other, then it releases.
I know people who avoid therapy who basically say, our relationship is good enough, and they worry that therapy will potentially bring problems, or they're afraid. How would you sell therapy to someone like that in that state, or advocate for it?
First of all, I wouldn't necessarily. I think it's okay to live. I mean, if a couple is okay living with a certain level of not getting too deep into things, and that's where they're comfortable, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Most people live like that. And I don't, I know some people think that therapy is for everyone and always good, and I'm like, I'm not in the business of selling therapy. But if it's needed and people are scared, if they're avoiding therapy not because they just don't want to go there, but because they're scared, I would say, it's often like a very rewarding journey. I mean, if you find the right therapist, if you're doing it in the speed and environment that works for you, it's very rewarding to like have, to live an examined life where you get into like a deeper register of what your life is about. I mean, that's my preference. I mean, not everyone lives that way, and that's fine.
And how does what's happening in the rest of the world impact our relationships? I know that's a large question, but I see you tease that out also on the show.
Yeah, that's sort of in terms of my own academic interests. That's sort of what my academic life has been about, both with individuals and with couples. I think people typically think, I mean, psychoanalytic thinking has kind of made its way into the culture, and people are not surprised to hear that, their early childhood, their attachments, all of that, their relationship with their mother, they expect all of that to be relevant to their romantic life. I think what people are not so much aware of, especially in our culture here in the States, people are not so aware of how factors such as, whether it's like class or economic background or ethnic background or historical events and events that are happening right now, like socio-political events, infiltrate both their choice of partner, infiltrate how they structure their relationship, and their experience of their partnership in the here and now. So, if you're asking, for example, in terms of what's happening right now in our country and in the world, part of what we all know is happening right now is there's like a very intense battle over basic ideological positions. Like, are we looking for some kind of fair, egalitarian way of negotiating difference? Are we committed to protecting the vulnerable or the vulnerabilities within us? Or is it a fight for who's going to dominate and who's going to win by way of power or money or influence? And that's happening in the world out at large, and that's infiltrating how couples are negotiating their difference between them. A couple is a mini political system, and the pull towards like polarization and righteousness and being dogged about your own worldview, I mean, we're all part of that right now, is influencing what's happening in couples' lives, and it's pretty intense.
Can you speak about an example of, an example where you see something play out and understand eventually that the context is external, from the couple?
Yeah, many examples. I mean, probably every couple that I work with, I could pull out an example, but I'll use couples from the show, so I'm not messing on confidentiality. But the cutest example I can give is we had a couple where they used to get into like very serious arguments about the noise he makes at the table while eating. They talked about how on their first date he licked the plate. But this was like an ongoing argument between them for years. I mean, they were in their 70s. And when I started working with them, they were like, yeah, it's just an argument about control. And I'm like, this is not just an argument about control. And as we dug in and tried this, that, and the other, what really turned out was that she was from middle class striving towards upper middle class background, and he was working class and very ideologically committed to his working class background. And he didn't want any kind of fancy shit pulled over him. And that it really was about like they're negotiating their backgrounds and like, do you accept me for who I am and for the values that I bring into the relationship? And once they understood that and we found a language for that, it just, the whole thing became like funny and adorable, like those fights.
And so it's almost like he was testing her, not consciously, like
he was having
to
like
accept.
a class protest at every meal.
Wow. You know, you described yourself, and I've heard you say this before, as a romantic. And I wonder how that squares with the number of relationships, you know, and I know you do one-on-one therapy as well as couples therapy. You know, you've met so many people working through so much.
Yeah.
How are you able to stay a romantic, you know?
Totally because of my patients.
Yeah.
You know, one of the amazing things about being in my profession is I get to see people kind of get through and get over a lot of their conflicts, a lot of their traumas, and find a certain kind of source within them to bring out the best in themselves and give their partner a lot. I mean, people are capable of incredible generosity, love, transcendence. It's
romance.
Romance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, psychoanalysis and even therapy can be inaccessible to many. And I feel like the show is a way for people to experience what therapy is like, right? I mean, it was very bracing the first time I saw an episode and I realized, oh, I'm in the session with these people who are really struggling, you know? And it feels like it sort of demystifies therapy.
Yeah.
And I wonder, do you imagine viewers like me and the rest of us taking kind of wisdom or lessons from the show into their own lives?
Yeah, I think that was the original intent. Part of the intention was to demystify therapy, to show what it's really like, to show, to in a way teach a little bit about psychological thinking, and to extend it for people that are not typically exposed to this way of thinking. And I can tell you that every day people stop me on the street and say, thank you, I've learned so much. This has helped my relationship. People often say to me, the show has saved my marriage. People take a lot from it, and exactly what we were hoping for, which is super satisfying.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
To be accosted by strangers with that, that kind of, those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also, I think watching the show taught me how little I understood about psychoanalysis specifically, right? Like I understood, I thought of it as a one-to-one conversation with someone. You know, I thought this was like a rarefied someone smoking a cigar, the other person's on the couch. You know, it's like 10 years of commitment.
A cigar is not a cigar.
Right, exactly. A cigar is not a cigar. There's no end in sight.
Right.
You're never over. It's never finished. You go 2 times a week. It costs $10,000.
What do you mean 2 times a week? 4 or 5 times a week?
I'm sorry, 5 times
Yeah.
a week.
Yeah.
You know, and I think one of the things I've realized from watching the show is that you're bringing psychoanalysis as one like methodology, one
Yeah.
framework, and I guess that's what I mean. That was really new to me to understand what you were doing, because that intent listening and the way you're able to reflect back to the people that you're talking to. Suggestions or even themselves, you know, what is actually going on for them.
Yeah.
It made me understand the difference between psychoanalysis and therapy, which I had understood. And I guess, could you speak a little bit to, I know this is the world you live in, but sort of what you would explain to a lay person just about the way psychoanalysis hopes to work, you know? Like,
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that the work I do with couples and the work on the show is a combination. I mean, I'm trained as an analyst, so I introduce a lot of psychoanalytic type listening and thinking, but it's also very systems oriented, which is a way that family therapists work. So I first of all, in that sense, it's different from typical psychoanalysis, which is not one-on-one. My patient is the couple, so it's a little different. But what is psychoanalytic about this way of working is, first of all, the emphasis on listening for unconscious processes. And what I mean by that is what I'm listening for, I mean, going back to the idea of stories, I'm listening for what is, you could say, beneath the conscious level of experience. What's under the story that people get locked into? What have they repressed, dissociated, not allowed themselves to think? As a couple, what are they refusing to engage with? What are the stories in the background that are informing them that they're not aware of? And that type of listening for what is not conscious is psychoanalytic listening. In addition, there's an acute awareness that early life events, early childhood events tend to play out later in life, and you listen for ways that things repeat themselves over a lifetime, and certain kind of defense patterns, stories, expectations repeat themselves, and you listen for that and you try to understand the origin. That's also a psychoanalytic approach. And the other piece is what we call in jargon transference, which is the idea that we project onto each other a lot of the stuff that we bring from earlier or from elsewhere. And as an analyst, you get very good at listening for those projections and those transferences and learning how to work with them.
Have you had clients, couples, or individuals who have taught you something about yourself? Or changed or altered you?
Question. Yeah. I would probably like, first of all, if there's a client or a patient that hasn't taught me something about myself or hasn't revealed to me something new, then I didn't do the work with them, then something didn't happen. Because when you engage with another person, you're always learning something new because they bring something new and they see something that you weren't aware of, or they put you in touch with something that you didn't have a chance to visit before. So generally, if that's not happening, that's not good. Mm-hmm. Then I'm blocked in some way. And you know, when you ask me about being a romantic, I mean, yeah, people have taught me incredible things, like people's capacity to like listen to each other in ways that I didn't know people are capable of, being generous with each other. Yeah.
Common
Yes.
that this happens.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, you said this simple thing that stuck with me in one of the interviews I listened to about phrasing your needs to your partner as a request and not a complaint. And, and I thought there was like a simple, deep wisdom in the idea. But I wondered if you could explain why that is transformative.
Right.
And how to, is there a trick to remembering it, accessing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, think about the experience of somebody coming at you and saying, "Why'd you not get milk?" Versus, I've been on both sides.
Yes, certainly.
Versus, "Would you mind getting some milk next time?" I think we're inclined to, when we have a bad feeling, we're inclined to want to dish it, to kind of send it out in the form of some kind of complaint, attack, blame. We want to get rid of the bad feeling. And of course that immediately puts the other person on the defense, like, uh-oh, I did something wrong, I'm a bad person, or I've failed. And it's then most likely to generate some kind of cycle of conflict and discomfort and disharmony. It's in the music.
Right, you think you're getting rid of it, but you're actually,
You're actually
putting a brick in the wall that grows.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Orna. Also, has any dog ever been a better participant in a conversation on the stage?
No.
I don't think so.
Would you have something to say?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin.